Hey guys! Welcome back to my YouTube channel, and do not forget to subscribe, comment, and like all down below. And so guys, we are gonna finish or not of The Puppy Plays Bear by Ellen Miles. Also, you can get Duolingo for free. Just do not get the Plus. It will cost money. Just use the free way. So guys, let's get started. Chapter 7. Lizzie scooped Bear into her arms. She stepped off the trail and tried to hide behind the tree. She squinched her eyes shut, but then her curiosity got the better of her. She opened her eyes, and Lizzie saw the most amazing thing, a team of sled dogs pulling a wooden sled. A person in a red jacket stood on the sleds. Runners. The dogs looked just like grown-up bears. They weren't barking or whining. They just trotted happily along, breathing hard in the cold, crisp air. Now that they were closer, Lizzie could hear the jingle of the tags of their collars. Easy, easy, Denali, easy, Satika, easy, dogs. Lizzie thought that voice was familiar. The dogs slowed to a stop. They stood panting. The driver tossed a big metal hook onto the snow. It was attached to a rope, like a ship's anchor. Bear was in trace. Lizzie let him down. He stared at the dogs. His tail wagged madly as he strained at his leash. Wow, you guys are the coolest. I wish I could do that. This was the most exciting. This was the most excited Lizzie had ever seen Bear. She tightened her grip on the leash. It was embarrassing enough to be hiding behind a tree without having a dog run off. Need some help? Now Lizzie remembered where she had heard that familiar voice. The sled driver was Fern. Of all people. Now Lizzie was really embarrassed. Fern was going to make fun of her again. I'm fine, she said, even though she was floundering in the deep snow on the side of the trail. Those big old-fashioned snowshoes are impossible. I trip and fall all the time. When I wear them, Fern grinned and stuck out a hand. Come on. Maybe Fern wasn't going to laugh at her. Maybe Fern was going okay after all. Lizzie took the older girl's hand, and Fern pulled her back onto the trail. You're a sled dog driver? Lizzie couldn't believe it. How cool. Yep, I'm a musher. Fern bent to say hello to Bear. Hey, little sweetie. You seem to be totally recovered from your big adventure. She petted him, then straightened up and looked at Lizzie. Lizzie, I've helped raise a lot of dogs, but this little guy is really something special. He's so confident. I know. Lizzie was about to ask if Fern knew anyone who was looking for a puppy, but Fern spoke up first. How about a ride? Me on the dog sled? Lizzie stared at Fern. Really? Sure, why not? My dogs and I have been out for a couple of hours, so they're tired and not nearly as wild as they can sometimes be. If we'd met you earlier in our run, I never would have been able to stop them. But even with my snow hook, Fern yanked on the rope. So So that's what the big metal anchor thing was called. Lizzie looked at the wooden sled and then back at Fern. So I would ride in the sled while you stand behind me? That's right. Fern smiled at Bear. And you can tuck little Bear into your jacket so he'll be safe. I have a feeling he'll enjoy the ride too. Fern walked Lizzie up the line of dogs. These are Denali and Satika, my lead dogs. She pointed to each one. Behind them are Kodiak and Chewina. And then we have Koyuk, and Homer. Lizzie thought the dogs were beautiful. Every one of them. Guys, remember Kodiak? I don't think that's him though. One of them. Some had one blue eye, just like Bear. They had curly tails like his, and pointy noses, and pointy ears. They were long-legged, strong-looking dogs. Are these all huskies? Lizzie thought they looked a little different from the husky or her dog breeds poster. Fern nodded. They're Alaskan huskies, like Bear. Some people use Siberian huskies for their sled teams, but my dad and I like Alaskans. Some people say Alaskans are faster. Some people say Siberians can run forever. I like Alaskans because they're basically mutts. Their ancestors are Alaskans village dogs with all sorts of other breeds thrown into the mix. Hunting hounds, Siberians, Malamutes, even greyhounds. Lizzie was fascinated. She was about to ask some more questions, but Fern guided her toward the sled. More questions, but Fern guided her toward the sled. Some of the dogs were starting to bark and jump around. Dogs were getting restless. Fern grabbed the sled. We'd better get going, or they'll take out without us. Lizzie unbuckled her snowshoes, and Fern stowed them behind the passenger's part of the sled. Then Lizzie tucked Bear into her jacket and zipped it up tight so he couldn't wriggle out. She climbed into the sled. Her heart beat quickly. She couldn't believe she was about to get a dog sled ride. Fern tucked a blanket around Lizzie. All set? Lizzie nodded. I think so. Keep your hands inside the sled, Fern advised. She climbed onto the runners behind Lizzie and pulled up the snow hook. Hike! She cried. Let's go! Immediately the dogs strained at their harnesses. Lizzie felt a thrill run through her whole body as the sled began to move. In a moment, the dogs were trotting quickly. They charged up the path, with the sled gliding behind them. Lizzie's eyes filled with tears. She wasn't sure why exactly. It wasn't the cold breeze in her face. It was that it was so beautiful. So wonderful to be flying through the snowy woods, watching the dogs run. Their tongues flapped in the cold air as they worked together as a perfect team. Wow, Lizzie felt completely happy now. I know, Fern spoke up behind her. Isn't it amazing? I've wanted to do this ever since I was a little girl, and Dad told me about Susan Butcher. She won the Iditarod 4 times. Now I'm in training myself for the Junior Iditarod. Next year, Dad and I are both going to Alaska. He's been training for years, and he thinks he and his team are ready. Wow! Lizzie hugged Bear's warm, heavy puppy body to her chest. She could hear his little heart beating extra fast. instead of curling up for a nap. He kept his head poked out of the top of Lizzie's jacket. He watched every move the sled dogs made. Lizzie leaned back on the sled as the dogs galloped down a hill, sending chunks of snow flying. The ride was over way too soon. Fern drove the dogs right up to the Harris house. Mom, Dad, Charles, and the Bean, who had just returned from their ski tour, stood and stared at Lizzie climb out of the sled. That was awesome, Lizzie grinned at Fern. Thank you so much. Why don't you and Bear come over to our place tomorrow? Fern had one foot off the sled, holding the dog's back. You can meet my dad and all our other dogs. We can even go for another ride. She grinned and waved at Lizzie's family. Then she hopped back onto the sled and with a hike and a wave, she was gone. Chapter 8. Cordelia drove Lizzie and Bear over to the Ferns' house right after breakfast. The next morning, this time Lizzie didn't mind at all that the rest of her family would be skiing. In fact, this time Lizzie could tell that Charles was a little jealous of her as she climbed into the Cordelia's old beaten-up pickup truck. You'll get a ride tomorrow, she reminded him as she waved goodbye. When Fern's dad Anne had called to make arrangements for Lizzie's visit, he had offered to take all the Petersons out for a dog sled ride. Charles and the Bean were pretty excited about that. I had a feeling that you and Fern would hit it off. Cordelia turned up a long, rutted dirt drive. A few minutes later, the dog's crazy, just like you. Maybe you can convince her and her dad to adopt Bear. Wouldn't that be great? She pulled up to a small log cabin next to a big barn. Lizzie could hear dogs barking. That's exactly what I've been thinking. Lizzie smiled at Cordelia. I'll do my best. She climbed out of the truck, holding Bear's leash. Call me if you need a ride back, Cordelia drove off with a wave. Fern came outside. Welcome to Dog Central. She waved a hand at the huge fenced-in area between the cabin and the barn. Lizzie felt like she was in dog heaven. There seemed to be dozens of dogs out here. Dogs were running, playing, rolling on their backs in the snow. We don't like to keep our dogs tied up. Fern led toward the barn. They can roam around anywhere inside the fence, and they're welcome in the house. Last night, I ended up sleeping on the floor because Homer and Stika claimed my bed. Fern knelt down to say hello to Bear. Hi, sweetie. She picked him up so she could nuzzle his neck. You know, Lizzie decided to grab the moment Bear needs a home. He does. Fern's eyes lit up. Maybe my dad will. Maybe my dad will what? She said in a deep voice behind Lizzie. She turned to see a smiling man in a brown coveralls. Lizzie, this is my dad, Fern introduced them. Dad, this is Lizzie. Hi, Mr. Carter. Lizzie smiled. Call me Tim. The man stuck out a hand for a shake. And who do we have here? He reached over to scratch Bear between the ears. Dad, this is Bear. Fern spoke up. And guess what? He's looking for a home. Tim Carter frowns. He looks like one of Bruce Madden's dogs. Lizzie thought that name sounded familiar. I think he is. Bruce gave Bear to the Harrises to foster because he said Bear was a Unmati. She stopped suddenly. She thought better of telling Tim and Fern that Bruce thought Bear was lazy. I mean, because Bruce had to go to Alaska for the Iditarod. 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 Dad, Fern looked up at her father. Maybe Bear would fit in here with us. Tim Carter eyed Bear suspiciously. I don't think so. He shook his head. Bruce already offered this pup to me, but I said no thanks. Why would I want to take on one of his rejects? Please, Daddy, Fern begged. We're already feeding 28 dogs. Tim shook his head again. You know I'm putting every spare cent toward our Iditarod goal. I can't afford to keep a dog that doesn't pull. I'm going to busy getting my own team trained. I can't take on a puppy now. But Fern began. Tim held up his hand. Enough, Fern, speaking of feeding. The dogs are hungry. I think you've got some chores to do. He nodded curtly to Lizzie, turned and walked toward the cabin. Fern gave Bear one last squeeze. Sorry, sweetie. She kissed his face. Sorry, Lizzie. I guess Dad's right. Bruce is the best musher around. Fern shrugged. He's a real serious trainer, and he knows his dogs. Fern put Bear back on the ground and handed his leash to Lizzie. Want to meet the rest of our dogs? You can help me feed them. She led Lizzie into the barn and introduced her to dog after dog. This is Muffin, she said, and Spud, and his brother Tater, and that's Lollipop, and T-Bone. Dad always hungry, so all his dogs have food names. In case you didn't notice, while Lizzie petted the dogs and let them sniff Bear, Fern pulled out a couple of big buckets and started mixing. We use high-protein kibble, she said, plus hunks of frozen salmon that we get from a guy in Canada. We mix it all up with warm water, and this sticky fish oil, that's supposed to be good for them. She poured a long glug from a big bottle into each bucket. By now there was a dozen dogs milling around, all hungry eyes and lolling tongues. Don't they ever get in fights? Lizzie was trying to pat 3 dogs at once. How did Fern and her dad manage all these dogs? Fern shook her head. They all know who's boss. She pointed at a lanky black dog. Muffin there. She runs the show. Nobody would ever mess with her. T-Bone is second in command. Every dog knows his or her place. That's why they don't care about Bear being here. They know he's just a pup and no threat. Once they fed the dogs, Fern showed Lizzie where they kept the sleds, some for racing, some for training, some like the one Lizzie had been all the day before for giving rides. There was even a tandem sled with room for 2 drivers. Fern said she had learned to mush on that sled, standing in front of her dad as they drove the dogs together. Then they went into the harness room. There everything was neat and organized. The harnesses were hung in order of size, each with a plunget near it, listening names of the dogs. They fit. Muffin, Steak, Waffle. That's cute. Koyuk. I think that means yogurt, but Koyuk. Koyuk. Lizzie read the names on the plunget. She reached out to touch one of the harnesses, and 3 dogs ran over, tails wagging eagerly. They're dying to go out for a run. Fern said these dogs just love the pool. It's in their gens. Plus, we make it fun. Our training sessions are like playtime. Lizzie looked down at Bear. He was on his hind legs, with his nose stretched way up high to sniff at a smaller set harness, whose plumpness read Peanut Homer Spud. Bear's tail wagged just as hard as the big dog's. You know what, Lizzie said, I think that Bruce guy might be wrong about Bear. I think he might like to pull too. Chapter 9. What do you mean? Fern sat down on a hay bough and pulled Bear onto her lap. Okay, Lizzie sat down next to her. The truth is that Bruce told the Harris sisters that Bear was lazy and unmotivated. That's why he gave him up. Fern nodded. Bruce can't afford to keep a dog that doesn't pull, and any more than we can. But you said that Bruce was a real serious trainer. Fern nodded again. He is. He keeps his dogs tied up whenever they're not working, and never lets them in the house. And he's very strict. It works for him, though he wins a lot of races around here. So guys, I'm gonna get some water and I am gonna continue. So guys, let's get started again. Well, I don't have any experience with sled dogs, Lizzie said, but I have trained a lot of puppies, and one thing I've learned that all puppies learn differently. Some learn quickly, some slowly, some need lots of rules, and others need to be babied a little. Fern's eyes lit up. You mean you think it's just that Bruce might have been the right trainer for Bear? Exactly. Lizzie was starting to talk faster now. It's true that Bear likes to sleep in front of the fire, and he's not the most hyper dog I've ever seen, but you know when he's been the most excited every time he's around your dogs. Then when he can't keep his eyes off them, and you should have seen him when he heard them coming down the trail yesterday. He pulled me right off my feet. By the time Lizzie finished, Fern had jumped up. She shooed all the grown-up dogs outside and into their pen. Then she rummaged around in a big wooden box beneath the harness hooks. I think this might fit him. She held up a tangle of purple nylon webbing. This was Homer's puppy harness. We start play training our dogs really young. You mean? Lizzie jumped up. Can we try that on Bear and see if he likes to pull? I think we should try our training method and see if it works better than Bruce's. Fern nodded. I think you might be right. She picked up Bear and spoke softly to him, petting him gently as she arranged the harness over his head. See, the X goes over his back and his part goes in front of his chest. She showed Lizzie nothing goes around his neck, since a sled dog would never pull from there. Bear's tail wagged hard. Oh boy, does this mean I get to run like the other dogs? are so good. Fern gave Bear a kiss on the nose. He doesn't seem to mind the harness at all. What's next? Lizzie was dying to know. Fern rummaged in the big box again. She pulled out a long nylon rope and clipped it onto a ring on Bear's back. Next, we see how he likes the feeling of dragging the rope around. She put Bear down on the floor, then walked quickly to the other corner of the big room. Here, Bear! She clapped her hands. Bear trotted happily across the room to Fern. The lion dragged along behind him on the barn's dirt floor. Lizzie laughed. He doesn't even seem to notice it. That's a good sign, said Fern. Sometimes puppies get spooked right from the start, and you have to take it very, very slowly. She gave Bear a huge and a hug. Now you call him. Lizzie called and Bear galloped over. Yay! For Bear! Yay for Bear! Lizzie scoops him up for a hug. What a good puppy! Bear squirms happily and licked her face. The girls sent Bear running back and forth a few times. Then Fern went to the box again and pulled out a chunk of wood, a smaller log about the size of Lizzie's fornium. This is the big test. She knelt down and tied the wood to the end of the rope attached to Bear's harness. Hold him for a sec. She went back to the corner of the room. Okay, let him go. Here, Bear. Bear took off at a gallop. The wood bumped along behind him. He stopped for a second and turned to look at it. What's that doing there? Oh, well. Then he kept going, dashing across to Fern, without the log bumping away. When he reached her, he stopped only long enough for a kiss from Fern before he turned around and ran right back to Lizzie, wearing a big doggy grin. This is great! This is what I was meant to do! I love to pull! Fern threw up her hands. Awesome! Lizzie, you were so right. The barn door slid open. What's going on here? Tim Carter stood with his hands on his hip. Dad, look! Bear loves to pull. Fern pointed. Please, can we keep him? Tim shook his head. Honey, I thought I made myself clear. Even if this pup pulled like Balto, I just don't have time to train a puppy right now. Fern's face fell. Lizzie felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. I'm sorry, girls. Tim spoke more gently. I'm sure he'll find a good home with someone who's looking for a pet. Then he put on a smile and clapped his hands. Hey, how about a ride? I'm about to hitch up my team to the tandem sled. Maybe Lizzie would like to try driving them. Lizzie knew he was just trying to cheer them up by changing the subject. But she couldn't help herself. Really? She asked. I would love that. I would love that. Chapter 10. What a racket. Mom had her hands over her ears. It was the next day, and Lizzie was back at Fern and Tim Carter's, along with the rest of her family. It was time for their sled ride. Tim and Fern were ready for them. Fern had harnessed her team of dogs, hinched them up to her sled. Dogs were so excited. They could not wait to run. Lizzie could hardly believe how loudly they were barking. It sounded like 600 dogs instead of 6. Tongues hung out, tails wagged, ears were all high alert. The dogs pawed at the ground and jungled at their lines. It took both Tim and Fern to hold them so that they would not take off by themselves. After Lizzie put Bear into the puppy pen, she helped Mom into the sled, then settled the bean on her lap. "You're not going to believe how fun this is." She tucked the blanket around them. "What about you?" Mom asked. "We'll be right behind you," Lizzie said. "I'm going to help Tim hitch up his dogs." Fern climbed onto the runners on the back of her sled, and the dogs went crazy with barking. "Hike!" said Fern. Tim let to the Satika harness, and they were off. The dogs stopped barking the instant they began to run. They took off dashing like lightning across the snowy field. "Whee!" Lizzie heard the bean cry. Lizzie laughed as she just imagined Mom's face. "Okay, Lizzie, let's get our team ready." Tim went to the gate of the pen, grabbed two eager dogs by their collar, and turned them over to Lizzie, who let them drag her over to the sled where the gain line and tug lines were laid out. Ready for the dogs to be clipped in, she attached Tater and Spud to the lines nearest the sled. They were the wheel dogs, the ones who helped steer the sled around corners. Tim brought out two more dogs, Donut and Waffle, just cute names, and clipped them in front of Tater, and Spud. Donut and Waffle were the point dogs, that strong ones who helped power the sled. The dogs were raring to go, just like Fern's team. "Maybe you could help hold them," Tim shouted to Charles and Dad over the wild barking. Dad stepped forward and grabbed Spud's harness. "Got him." Charles grabbed Tater's. Tim was already bringing the last two dogs over to get clipped, and Muffin and T-Bone were the lead dogs, strong and bold. They were well trained to pay attention to Tim's commands, but also smart and confident enough to do what they knew was right in any situation. Watching Tim clip them in, Lizzie thought Bear could have been a lead dog someday if he'd only had the chance. Tim held T-Bone's harness. "Okay," he shouted. "Lizzie's help your dad and brother into the sled." "What about you?" Dad looked up at Lizzie as she tucked a blanket around him. "And Charles, where are you riding?" Lizzie smiled and pointed to the back of the sled. It was Tim's tandem sled, the one she'd been on yesterday, when she had the time of her life helping to drive a dog team. "I'm driving." She headed back to stand on the runners. Her brother and father craned their necks around to stare at her. Charles' mouth fell open. Lizzie cracked up. "Don't worry, Tim's in charge, but I'll be your co-pilot." She almost could drive alone if she wanted to. Tim yelled over the barking as he took his place behind Lizzie. "She's a natural." Lizzie beamed. It was true. Driving a team of sled dogs seemed like a most natural thing in the world. It was just like Aunt Amanda had said. If you found the thing that was right for you, you knew it. The day before, driving in a sled for the first time, Lizzie had felt sure of herself right from the start. Somehow she had known just how to lean her weight to one side, the sled like a scooter. When the dogs were working hard going up the steep hill, how to know just when to call out gee or haw to get the dogs turning to the right or left when a fork appeared in the trail. Mushing was the most fun Lizzie had ever had. She was already having Ida Tara dreams. Maybe she would adopt Bear and train him to pull her on a scooter. That's how some mushers started, according to Tim, and someday she would have a whole team of dogs. Maybe someday she would win the most amazing race, or even just finish it, which would be enough. Okay, Muffin, yelled Tim, hike! And the dogs stopped barking and took off, jerking the sled hard. Silently, the dogs raced up Her eyes sparkled. Guess what? Dad changed his mind. He decided he was wrong about Bear. Once he saw the way he pulled that log, he thought about it overnight. And this morning he told me I can adopt Bear if I promise to do all his training and chip in for his food. She bent to kiss Bear, who dozed on her lap. He'd opened one eye and licked her hand. I love my new home. It's cozy and warm inside. And I also get to run and pull things. What could be better? For just 1 second, Lizzie felt her heart sink. She had been imagining Bear as her dog, but then she smiled. This was so much better. Bear belonged up here in the north, where he would have snow to roll in all winter long, and older dogs to teach him the ways of running as a team. She held up her glass. Congratulations. I think you guys are the perfect forever family for Bear. As they clinked glasses on airy noise rose from outside, a howling yipping, crooning hula baloo. What is that? Mom's eyes widened. The dogs are singing. Tim got to open the door. They do it all the time. One starts and the others join in. Sometimes we sing along with them. He poked his head outside. I think I know why they started. Come see. Everybody jumped up from the table and ran to the door. Tim pointed straight overhead. Lizzie looked up to see brilliant streaks of red and green pulsing through the sky, filling the darkness of dancing vials of color. Oh, she drew in a breath of clear, cold air. How beautiful! It's the northern lights, Fern whispered. The whole sky is celebrating with us. And Bear, nestled in her arms, lifted up his little nose to the sky and joined in the howling choruses. The end, guys. So, guys, we're going to end this video right here. And, guys, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment down below. Bye!